We are at Green Animals Topiary Gardens in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. It's an 1860s, 19th, early 20th century gentleman's farm, completely intact. And it was the summer home of the Brayton family from Fall River. And in the early 20th century, they developed it into this topiary garden that you see that was completely self-sustaining. They had vegetables and fruits and everything, but they also had a gardener from the Azores who was totally into topiary, and that's why you see what you see today.
The topiaries were actually created in the early 20th century by Joseph Carreiro, who was a Portuguese immigrant that was hired by the Brayton family to create ornamental horticulture. And the topiary traditions in Portuguese culture came out very strongly, and he chose animals as a very fun and fanciful way of essentially making an ornamental garden a little bit more interesting and whimsy.
Over time, the first gardener, Joe Carreiro, was succeeded by his son-in-law, George Mendonça, and he continued to make topiary up until the 1980s. And they strictly did things from memory, from the Azores. There was no plan on paper. It was all what they knew. They wanted to have a garden that was, they call it enfilade, a bunch of little rooms all next to each other that you wander through, and you never see the whole thing at once. So as you walk around, you discover things. And in all, they were here for over 100 years working on the same garden. Alice Brayton, who bequeathed the property to us in 1971, was one of the founding members of the Preservation Society. She helped to save Hunter House in Newport, which was our first property. She was very much involved in preservation efforts. And so she didn't want her gardens to go away. I mean, she watched this man create them for decades and wanted to make sure they were safeguarded, so she bequeathed them to us.
This is a fantastic garden. It's the largest topiary garden in North America, which I think is pretty impressive. There are more than 80 different animals here, all sculpted by hand, by real artists.
When you're working out in the garden, you hear a lot of oohs and ahs as people turn the corner or when kids run around the corner and see the next thing. But I think they're also just surprised by the fact that everything is intact. All of the outbuildings from a 19th century farm are all still here, untouched and preserved. And that's unusual for this part of the country.
Even today, we try to garden in the same way that the Azorean gardeners of 100 years ago gardened. We try not to disrupt their routines, to keep the tradition going and to do things the way it was being done before.
Green Animals actually has its own chief horticulturalist, and he works here full-time, year-round, cultivating plants, growing plants in our greenhouse, and also maintaining all of the different plant materials that are here, annuals and creating perennials too. So it has its own horticulturalist and also a really competent and incredibly talented group of volunteers who painstakingly make this garden look its best.
There's a fragility about a garden like Green Animals. If you care about nature, you have to be very respectful of it. And things can go wrong. Sometimes an ice storm will crack the neck of the giraffe and we have to start all over again, but that's a topiary garden. I think this is a very magical place, and this is not something that you see regularly, so I think it really impresses people. It is whimsical, it's fun. It's a place that not only children but adults love as well.